This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, continuing my conversation with Greg Hallett, who is one of the leading expert on the legitimacy of the British monarchy, most recently having authored The Hidden King of England, a five-part series that has drawn such a startling response from the crown that they have even revised the rules of succession and post-dated them to cope with the evidence that Greg is a mess, that Queen Elizabeth II is not the legitimate heir to the throne. Greg, your work is just fascinating.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for that. So what I've been doing is taking the 5 volumes of The Hidden King of England, Arthur Christie Unveiling the Rose, into the realms of the judiciary, and it appears that the judiciary lacks subject matter jurisdiction and is unable to hear the case, my case, to be acknowledged as Prince Pretender to the throne and crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, on the basis that their Privy Council oath swears an oath to the Queen, whether she's illegitimate or not, and the Privy Council oath is actually a mafia oath, and it uses the word let, L-E-T-T, which means condemn, which is to condemn anyone who challenges the monarchy, even though the laws have changed to allow one to challenge the monarchy, and those laws were changed because it became self-evident that the British royal family are illegitimate. So I've been trying to have some large cases heard in the courts, and I've come across lack of subject matter jurisdiction before. I took Peter Eldridge Williams QC, who was the president of the Law Society, to the High Court, and he admitted in the High Court in February 2011 that he was Prince Philip's agent in New Zealand. And due to the predictions that this story would be written up in basically New Zealand in a place called North, which included North Island, North Shore, North Auckland, North Harbour, North Cope, North Grove Ave and Norton Road, all of the places that I lived, that Peter Williams QC, as Prince Philip's agent, was in fact targeting the heroin to me, and the Queen, it's called the Queen's heroin, and no one could be charged with the Queen's heroin. And all the areas that I lived in was where the heroin was targeted. Now what I found in trying to have a case heard against Peter Williams QC was that the courts did not want to hear it, and they delayed the case being heard for 5 years. Cars blown up, etc., by implosion, so it wasn't newsworthy. Quite a few murder attempts. Left the country to write up this story, and when the courts established that I was out of the country in Portugal working with Queen Victoria's great-great-great-great-grandson, that they then stopped, the courts of New Zealand stopped all communication with me by email once they had ascertained my IP address was in Portugal and Sintra, and they tried to establish that I was in New Zealand, so they had a manhunt for me in the north of the North Island and in the middle of the North Island to try and get the case heard in my absence. Now, the New Zealand is a test tube shaped country. It's isolated, it's in the middle of the South Pacific, and it's got 4 million people, roughly called Westerners. So it is a test case scenario. So New Zealand tests ever more critical forms of judicial and social control, and that is the major export product of New Zealand. That and having heroin transferred through New Zealand customs in order to make it less suspicious. And then New Zealand is promoted as the most honest country in the world, which it isn't. While my case was in the courts, Peter Williams QC was killed by cancer, which is one of the best things ever to happen in New Zealand. And he was surrounded by his homosexual lover, Paul Henry, and his fellow heroin trafficker, Winston Peters. and Winston Peters' ex-girlfriend, who became Peter Williams' common-law wife, Heaney Phillips, who was a heroin trafficking prostitute and is now Lady Heaney Phillips. So Sian Elias, the Chief Justice of New Zealand, then became the mafia boss. And what we need to realise is that the judiciary is the mafia. As soon as you have fake people at the top, like Queen Elizabeth II, and as soon as you have, in Sian Elias's case, she became the Chief Justice because her husband is a known child sex abuser, and he bribed everyone else so that she would get that position, so that Sian Elias could then protect her husband from any charges. And in the meantime, her husband's brother, who was an accountant, was murdered because there was also a theft of half a billion dollars there by Sian Elias. And Sian Elias, I was talking to two MPs, and they were saying that the Chief Justice of New Zealand, Sian Elias, was at an official function in a limousine, and she was having sex with the chauffeur in the back seat outside the official function, sitting on top of singing. So because New Zealand exports ever more critical modes of social and judicial control to the United Kingdom, and it's a whole lot cheaper to run those forms of social and judicial control in England, in New Zealand as opposed to England, that the British judiciary really thought that it was an absolutely fantastic thing that Sian Elias was coming over to England to be a mock judge in a reverse of history, which was the mock trial of the barons for the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. So in the 1215 history, King John I was essentially on trial, and in the 800 years later, in the mock trial, it was the barons that were on trial. And the anniversary of the Magna Carta was on the 15th of June 2015, about 3 months ago, in Runnymede, which is about a mile east of Windsor Castle. So Windsor Castle looks down on Runnymede, and it's basically some old floodplains. And about 3.41 miles south along the Great Walk from Windsor Castle to south is Cumberland Lodge, and we hold the royal marks of the Duke of Cumberland, who became King George V of Hanover, who was Queen Victoria's first and only legitimate husband. And Cumberland Lodge looks down onto Runnymede about 3 miles away. So when I lodged this case on the 10th of April 2015, and it was accepted by the courts on the 14th of April 2015, it's 650 pages. Okay, so it's that. Right. Yeah, so it's quite massive. Yeah, and then this is the material for the case. That was, the first one was what was lodged into the court, and this is what has happened afterwards. And the material that I lodged into the courts initially is all notarized and apostilled, which means that I can transfer it from Portugal and use it in England. So there's no question as to the legitimacy of the case, of the material. So the courts read it and they went, holy shit, what are we going to do? Now most cases, believe it or not, most cases are sent to Salford, S-A-L-F-O-R-D, which is northwest Manchester. And the cases are actually decided there by MI5 and sometimes MI6. Right? So all the cases are pre-decided outside the court, and the judges are just actors. And I'd have to say that the people working in Salford are working under EU directions. Right? So the EU has taken over the entire British judiciary. Now, because my case was so important and they wanted to thwart it, they sent it, instead of sending it to Salford in northwest Manchester, they sent it to Temple Bar for the lawyers to look at and to the Royal Courts of Justice for judges to look at. And I actually had that confirmed by the court staff that it had been sent to London. And I had it confirmed by a lawyer that it's normally sent to Salford. So what the lawyers at Temple Bar did was request my intelligence file. And my intelligence file, I've never worked in intelligence, by the way. I've never worked in intelligence, but my intelligence file is floor to ceiling 3 times. Right?
Really?
Yeah. And
We knew you were an intelligent fellow, but that's amazing.
so, they couldn't send it because it's too much of a data spike,
How could anyone even go through it, Greg, when it's that massive?
Oh, they just put the good stuff at the top, right? And, various people contribute to it, like Prince Philip's agent in New Zealand and the Queen Mother's bodyguard, right? And they wanted to stop me winning my court cases. And there was a big takeover of internal affairs, which is sort of MI5 equivalent. There's a big takeover of internal affairs in New Zealand in 1992-93, and that was basically when everything became rotten. Absolutely rotten. They got the worst people and stuck them in home intelligence, right, in internal affairs. And from 1993, I've never been allowed to win a court case, right? So there's some time between 1993 and 2005, they wrote on my intelligence file, and everyone's got an intelligence file, and there's the dummy intelligence file, which is intelligence for dummies, and then there's the real intelligence file, right? What's actually going on, what the person's really capable of. So one's a talk down and one is a potential and a realised. And what the Queen Mother's bodyguard and Prince Philip's agent in New Zealand wrote was, if you give this man any money, he will take over the world, right? So that's on the top of the intelligence file. And judges don't want to read an intelligence file. And the Ministry of Justice, the Department of Justice, is a branch of intelligence. They attend all the intelligence meetings. And the, I think it's called DOJ or JOD in America.
Department of Justice, yeah.
Department of Justice, so DOJ. The DOJ goes to all of the intelligence meetings in America. And intelligence tells the Justice Department what to do in process and in the outcome of cases. And judges are just actors. Right?
Very disappointing.
Very disappointing, but absolutely true. So they got the Chief Justice of New Zealand to deliver my intelligence file to England, to Cumberland Lodge, 3.41 miles from Windsor Castle, overlooking Runnymede. And the first appointment for Runnymede was the 15th of June. And the mafia boss, Peter Williams QC, died on the 10th of June. The Chief Justice, Sean Elias, became the mafia boss on the 10th of June, and then delivered my intelligence file to England. And that was her payoff. Right? And my intelligence file was there to show the judges the only way to deal with me, to suppress me. And the first thing it said was, you cannot have this person in the courtroom. He must never, ever, ever get into a courtroom. Right? And the reason being was when I was in the courtroom against Peter Williams QC, Prince Philip's agent, and who was the president of the Law Society, I just tore him apart and he broke down. And they actually had the Chief Justice, Sean Elias, waiting in the wings ready to give evidence against me in the High Court, and she didn't come in because I was winning. So
the Chief Justice
Yeah.
was going to testify against you.
Yeah. So my intelligence file goes to England, and the cover for that was that Sean Elias would be one of the 3 judges in the mock trial of the Barons on the 31st of July at Westminster. Right? And in 1215, none of the judges were Jewish, and in 2015, all 3 judges were Ashkenazi Jews.
Really?
Yeah. So it was a mock on more ways than one. And considering that Prince Marcus Manuel became King John II, and I've got in my legal papers that I'm claiming the position of Prince Pretender for King John III, because I'm purifying the name King John III, that all of this should go down around the Magna Carta and at the location of the Magna Carta. Now, what I wrote in my papers was that if any judge is a member, in these papers here, these initial papers here, which went from November to February, right, and they're all agreed to by the respondent, Francisco Manuel, that if any judge is found to be a member of a secret society and strikes this case out, then everything is found in my favour.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Now, from the time that the court accepted it on the 14th of April 2015 to giving it a case number on the 9th of July 2015, it's 13 weeks. And that was when Sean Elias brought my intelligence file over, was notified to the public as one of the 3 judges hearing the mock trial of the Barons by King John, essentially making King John the judge and jury. And the laws of succession were written in New Zealand with Sean Elias being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So they wanted to question Sean Elias on the laws of succession, how I created it, effected it, and how it played so completely into my hands, and why it was backdated to the 25th of April 2013, thus effectively Queen Elizabeth II was abdicating to me. And this was done in Cumberland Lodge. And the second judge in my case was High Court Judge Daniel John Pierce Higgins QC, who is a member of Cumberland Lodge, which is a secret society, and a speaker at Cumberland Lodge. And is a place where heroin, the Queen's heroin, is effectively distributed, and where the heroin money is effectively laundered. So, because my case was such a large amount, it was like 1.66 billion pounds, which is the value of the promises made, titles, 4 castles and 4 manor houses, that the fee, any claim above £415,000 requires a court fee of £10,000. So £415,000 above, you've got to pay in £10,000. So I managed to get a fee remission for £10,000, which went into the court. And what I found that what the courts are doing is they're laundering the heroin money through the fee remissions.
Really?
Yes. So what I got was 3 letters from the court, less than 5 lines, that took them less than an hour to write in total, and less than an hour to hear everything officially. So the courts are getting £10,000 an hour by fee remission and making that money real by laundering £10,000 of heroin money, hence the wars in Afghanistan, etc. Do you get that?
Yes.
See how it works? Yeah.
Yes. And obviously it's coming from an unimpeachable source when it's through the judiciary system.
Yeah, exactly. And the government will not question the judiciary. It'll say that it's a separate branch and it's got no control over the judiciary. But the judiciary is allowed access to all intelligence meetings. And the government will supply intelligence in order to rig the outcome of the case, of any case.
All this is very recent, Greg. You're talking about events of just a few months ago.
Yeah, I know. I'm just trying to think. Like,
I mean, it's taken so long to reach this point.
Well, it was 13 weeks in court, right? So it was 13 weeks not being heard, right? And I demanded that the case be heard. Demanded. You put it on the front page. What court do you want it heard in? I want it heard in Queen's Bench High Court. And then I say I want it heard man on man, which is the respondent is present and I'm present. And the respondent then has to answer all these points that he's already agreed to, right? So what the courts did is they realised that this case makes me Prince Pretender of the United Kingdom. So what the courts did was not notify the respondent.
Not notify the respondent?
Not notify the respondent, right?
That being you?
No, I'm the claimant. I'm the first claimant, and he's the first
How
respondent.
outrageous, Greg.
I know.
That's subverting the process.
What it means in legal terms is it is though the case was never begun. And it means that the judge's decisions are void, right? But what I put in the case was that if any member is if any judge is a member of a secret society,
Yes.
then
it defaults to you.
And then the decision defaults to me. So they want to give me Prince Pretender status. They actually want to, right? But they don't want to put their names to it because the higher orders, the priority to see on, down, to judges, which is quite a low-level position. They're saying to the judges, you got to do it. It's predicted. It's in the Bible. It's in the tradition received. It's outside the tradition received. This guy has overcome all obstacles, right? And that's what it says in the Bible. It says he will overcome all obstacles, which is all the murder attempts and that. People go, how does that happen? But that's called. It's actually got a title with it. So what they did was the Temple Bar picked 2 judges who were clearly members of secret societies and got them to strike my case out, or try to strike my case out, right? Which then found the case in my favour. And one is Judge Martin Parry, Batten Hall. I'll just look up that here. So the first judge was Judge Martin Parry, who's a district court circuit judge. He's not a high court judge. So I get the case number. The case number is awarded on the 9th of July. I'm not notified. The respondent isn't notified. And the papers are then given to the district court circuit judge Martin Parry, who is USOP, which is Unlawful Society of Pedophile Enablers, right? And he doesn't hear the case. He doesn't notify myself, the applicant. He doesn't notify the respondent. And he looks at the case, not in any court. And then he writes as though he is a High Court judge, as though he is on the Queen's bench, but he's an inferior judge. High Court, Queen's bench is superior, he's inferior, and tries to strike the case out. But he has no jurisdiction. He lacks subject matter jurisdiction, right? And he says that in his case. He says the statement of case discloses no reasonable grounds for lodging the claim. There's two reasons he could do that. One is because there's no dispute, except for a letter from the respondent out of time on the 2nd of March this year, 2015. Or he lacks subject matter jurisdiction because he's a district court judge usurping as though he's a High Court judge, or because he's sworn the oath, the Privy Council oath, to protect the Queen, and any information that exposes the Queen as a fake, he can't hear. And I've said to a judge in the High Court in New Zealand, I said to him, "Can you hear me?" And 3 times I said, "Can you hear me?" Waited 4 seconds, "Can you hear me?" And all he could say was, "I'm listening." Right? Because it was outside his jurisdiction. Yeah? So, because Queen Elizabeth is fake, and because she's illegitimate, she's not a royal, she's a commoner, and because she's abdicated 10 times and abdicated another 2 times to me, and the judges cannot act against her because they've sworn an oath to her, and the whole system of justice is called the Royal Courts of Justice, generally, and there's no royal family, and they've changed the laws so that it's okay to not acknowledge, to disregard the royal family as commoners. It's lawful now, but they can't get their head around it. So I looked up District Court Circuit Judge Martin Parry, and this is what it says. Name and shame, Children and Family Court Advisory and Support Services. This is a list of judges who are or have been involved in cases concerning social services and CAFCAS, not always in the best interest of children. There have been far too many children and families abused by the court system, and this must be resolved. Also, in the cases where CAFCAS has been involved with obvious bias against fathers and mothers, and the use of false or unevidenced allegations have been used to gain leverage in divorce disputes. Britain's worst judicial offenders, family division judges, home addresses, Judge Martin Parry, Batten Hall Parkhouse, Upper Batten Hall, Worcester, WR7 4RU. Right? So that's USOP, Unlawful Society of Pedophile Enablers, who, and what Judge Martin Parry did, couples would come in to debate, the care of their children and who would have the child when, and based on no evidence, he would strip the child from both parents and put it in foster care, where pedophiles have access to a child who no longer has its protective biological father and biological mother. Right? So Judge Martin Parry is a pedophile enabler. So I wrote about 4 letters to Judge Martin Parry and exposed this, and exposed that he was a Freemason, which the court staff confirmed, and that he was not a High Court judge, that he was a District Court judge, and he was usurping the position, and it was illegal for him to sign as a High Court judge, and it was illegal for him to sign as of the Queen's Bench, and it was illegal for him to strike the case out, even if it was based on insufficient statement of claim. You don't strike a case out on that, you stay a case. So they found in my favour by having Judge Martin Parry being Freemason and a judge usurping, inferior judge usurping as a superior judge, and being USOP, Unlawful Society of Pedophile Enablers. And what I did was write to the judges under the 1835 Statutory Declarations Act, which gives them 7 days to respond point by point. And in that process, Judge Martin Parry confirmed that he is a pedophile. Legally.
Really?
On papers. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
How extraordinary.
Which is well, it's bizarre to say the least, but it's accepted. It's on paper. So if he wants to accuse, me or whatever, if anyone does, I can say, here it is. Here it is. Here it is in papers. So I predicted from my experience of the way the New Zealand judiciary operates and the way New Zealand exports increasingly extreme forms of judicial and social control, that the way they treated me in New Zealand, having been exported to the United Kingdom, is the way that they would treat me in the United Kingdom. And so far, it's exactly the same, identical, right? So then my next prediction was, my first prediction was that they would use a throwaway judge. So the first judge, Martin Parry, is a throwaway judge, and that he's a pedophile enabler, pedophile minder, pedophile, USOP, Unlawful Society of Pedophile Enablers, a Freemason, and a inferior district court circuit judge usurping as though he is a High Court judge of the Queen's Bench. So what they say about circuit judges is that they make a circus of the courts. Rumpel says this even on the TV programs. That was exactly what happened. Now, my next prediction was that they would use a retired judge who was of a higher level. And my reaction to, because what I'm trying to do is get something clear on paper. I can show people, here it is, it's clear. And what they're doing at the moment is they're acknowledging me in 3D and 4D, but they're trying not to do the paperwork. So you just hold up the paperwork, here's the seal, right? So my next prediction was that they would bring in a retired judge, or a judge who was up for retirement or old enough to retire, and he would have an absolutely squeaky clean reputation. And the judges that have the absolutely squeaky clean reputations are often the ones trafficking the heroin and laundering the heroin money. And High Court Judge Daniel John Pierce Higgins QC fitted that bill, and he's a member of Cumberland Lodge, which is 3.41 miles from Windsor Park, along the Great Walk, along the Great Walk to Windsor Castle in Windsor Great Park, which overlooks Runnymede. So that's where the meetings were held. And I reminded, that's where the meetings were held between Judge Pierce Higgins and Shansirapuri Elias. And I reminded Judge Pierce Higgins that we hold the royal marks of the Duke of Cumberland, who became King George V of Hanover, and we hold the chalice and the signet ring of the King of Hanover. So because Judge Martin Parry's decision was void, I can have him substituted for cause and recused, have the case rendered void to be heard by another judge, and void and recused means to hear the case again as though it had never been heard. And because they had never notified the defendant, it is very obvious that the case had never begun, right? And,
Right.
What I found out was that in the civil procedure rules and the practice management rules, that Judge Martin Parry had revealed at least 20 counts of bias and conflict of interest and conflict of primary and secondary interest. Now, the main conflict of primary and secondary interest, which is the reason to recuse a judge, is that they swear an oath to the Queen, and this case was about the Queen being illegitimate. So they should have said straight away, I'm sorry, we can't hear the case. But instead, they were secret society members who tried to strike the case out, thus awarding it to me without putting their name on it. And they did that twice. Right? So I recused Judge Parry, which is very easy to do and it's very lawful, and according to the civil procedure rules, it's very obvious. Most of the judges in England and the court staff in England pretend to not know what recuse means, which means get rid of, start again, right? They pretend to not know what it means because it's such an effective legal tool for the applicant. Yeah. So, High Court Judge Pierce Higgins decided that he'd never heard of the word recuse, and he decided that my application to recuse first Judge Martin Parry, who masqueraded as a Queen's Bench judge, that he decided that it was actually an application to appeal or an appeal, because he refused to acknowledge that the laws of recusing a judge exist. And he's a member of Cumberland Lodge, right? So he
Greg,
said,
this is simply absurd.
I know. It's like there's no justice, there's no judiciary, there's actually no court in the United Kingdom anymore, right? It's all gone to the EU and it's all decided by intelligence in Salford and Temple Bar and the Royal Courts of Justice beforehand, using intelligence files from that person's original country, not notifying the defendant, and not even looking at the case, which is already agreed between the respondent and defendant, and all they have to do is stamp it. Yeah?
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah. So, High Court Judge Daniel John Pierce Higgins QC admitted on papers to meeting Sean Elias, Chief Justice of New Zealand, rigging the case and laundering heroin money. Right? To which I called him shameful for sullying the name of Cumberland and doing it at Cumberland Lodge. Right? So
yes.
My court file, I've got 3 of these in the court, right? And they want to give me 2 back, and I'm the only person in the United Kingdom that they won't post them back to. Right?
Yes.
So in the files, in these smaller files, in the process of moving things forward, like stamps and stuff, on the 31st of July 2015, using my title Lord Guardian, Lord Arch-Treasurer, Guardian of the Royal Secret, I struck Queen Elizabeth II with a black wand. Now, striking the Queen with a black wand, or striking the monarch with a black wand, is an act of dethroning the Queen. And someone actually tried it with Queen Victoria around 1850.
But there must be a legal context. I mean, it can't just be the performance of the black wand, Greg. There'd have to be a legal context that would warrant it. It's like getting married, you know. Just because a minister says you're now man and wife, that doesn't mean it's actually happened unless there are circumstances that justify it, including, for example, having a marriage license.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. So here's my titles. Your Grace Lord Chancellor, Arch-Treasurer Joseph Gregory Hallett, Lord Chancellor of the Kingdoms of England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and of Hanover, and of the Duchy of Saxon, Coburg and Gotha, 1st of March 2012. Lord Chancellor, Arch-Treasurer of the Royal Secret, 1st of March 2012. Knight of the Sangreal and Guardian of the Royal Secret, 20th of November 2012. Knight of the Sacred Line of the Royal Scottish House, Exile 21 of the House of Stuart, 6th of December 2012. Lord Arch Treasurer, Guardian of the Royal Secret, a gift from the Sacred House of Stuart, 8th of December 2012. Lord Chancellor, Guardian of the Royal Secret, 8th of December 2012. Knight of the Sword, Knight Biographer, 8th of December 2012. Knight of the Sword of the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha,
Well,
7th of May 2013. Knight Biographer of the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, 7th of May 2013. Right? So my title, Lord Arch Treasurer, Guardian of the Royal Secret, 8th of December 2012, allows me to strike Queen Elizabeth II with a black wand and dethrone her, right?
yeah, I can believe that. I simply meant that in the prior case, Greg, unless there were circumstances that were roughly comparable or, sufficiently similar, it wouldn't have been possible to have dethroned Victoria.
Yeah, well,
I mean, who was attempting to dethrone her?
no, it was a rig. Queen Victoria actually employed the person to attempt to dethrone her because it was done in London, and Queen Victoria didn't want to go to London because she wanted to be on the Isle of Wight with her son, who was arriving about a week later, who was 16, and she hadn't seen him since he was 0.
You're telling me Queen Victoria arranged for herself to be dethroned as a respite from office?
Yes. Yeah, Queen Victoria was in France more than she was in London. She was only in London 4 times as a queen. 4 times.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. She was known as the absent monarch. And people used to put signs on Buckingham Palace saying, monarch position available due to long absenteeism.
That's stunning.
Yeah, yeah.
Would it have had any legal significance if she had been touched by the black wand at that point in time? Could he have actually dethroned her that way?
What happened is she was 1869. She was relegated to Victoria Regina, Empress of India, because her son became the king. So what the public's told and what actually happens are 2 quite separate things, right? But getting back to Queen Elizabeth, on the 31st of July 2015, I struck Queen Elizabeth II with a black wand, and I could do that because one of my titles is Lord Arch Treasurer, Guardian of the Royal Secret. Yeah?
Greg, you're saying you actually did this?
Yeah, I did it in court papers. Yeah.
Oh, in court papers?
Yeah, yeah.
Symbolically, not physically.
Well, royalty is symbolic. Symbology and mythology.
Yeah, but I mean, you haven't been in a physical proximity to the Queen where you could have touched her with a black wand.
Well, it's the Royal Courts of Justice, and she's the head patron, so I did touch her.
Legally.
Yeah. So then the question is, was there a 3D, 4D reaction, right? And that's when you know it's true and it's been acknowledged, because registered as a member of the Star family means that I'm above Queen Elizabeth II. So she has to acknowledge me. And the rules of the game is that she cannot say anything against me, right? So she can't do a press release and go, that guy's full of it. She can't do that, right? She can't say anything against me. And then the question is, if the higher orders are behind this, they would have got some organisation lower down to acknowledge that. So I struck it with a black wand on the 31st of July 2015, and that was effective on the 17th of August 2015, right? So what sort of reaction would you get if Elizabeth had sunk down and I'd risen up, right? You'd get a flyover, right? Military Air Force flyover, yeah?
And you're telling me that happened?
That happened, right? Now, where I am...
Greg, this is stunning. This is absolutely stunning stuff.
Well, basically, I'm living under the, within 100 metres, I'm living under the clock tower of the chapel in Norfolk, Suffolk in East Anglia, right? Which is it's a populated area, yeah? And about 4 miles south of me is a place called Eye. And I shall get back to that. Remind me to talk about Eye.
That's because we're down to 10 minutes,
Okay,
my friend.
yeah, so I'll just finish with the... So I struck with a black wand on the 31st of August to be effective on the 17th of... 31st of July to be effective on the 17th of August 2015. And under the Statutory Declarations Act 1835, all the judges and Queen Elizabeth and anyone else who wanted to could respond point by point and argue the points as being not true, etc. Instead, what happened was I got a flyover, and this was between 10 and 11 at night, and it was a moonless night. It was one day after the full moon. There was a moderate cloud cover, so it was a very dark night, and there were typhoons, which are triangular-shaped planes, very large warfighters, and they were breaking the sound barrier, and they were flying without lights at 250 feet, and they were doing it in a crisscross pattern, about a minute and a half apart, yeah?
As a form of a salute.
Directly overhead, yeah? And they were 300 miles off course. And they were repeating...
Fascinating.
They were flying like about a minute and a half, vroom, and then a minute and a half, vroom, right? Minute and a half, lots of those, and then it got to about probably about 10 minutes apart, and there would have been about 25 or so flyovers, yeah. And I spoke to the locals. I went outside and had a look, because they're flying at 250 feet. So I spoke to the locals, and they said, look, they haven't seen a flyover here in at least 2 decades. And I spoke to someone in the military, and they said, I spoke to some locals about it, and they said, we were wondering what that was about. So I told them the story. And
You told them the story.
Yeah.
Oh my God, great.
Well, I was getting a haircut, so we had a couple of haircuts, so I keep them informed every 6 weeks. So, he kind of accepted my story, and he said it was incredibly unusual that there was this flyover. And I checked the low-level flyovers on the net, and the low-level flyovers happen, I'm in the very east of England, the very east, and they happen in mid-Wales, the English-Scottish border, and in central Scotland. So we're looking at 300, 400, 500 miles off course, right?
Except they were on a special assignment.
Because the Pro Decion instructed the British Air Force to do a flyover for me on that day, right?
Amazing.
Yeah. No,
amazing.
So that was the acknowledgement that Queen Elizabeth II had accepted that I had effectively and truly and legally struck her with a black wand and dethroned her, which is about 4 weeks before she officially became the longest reigning monarch of the United Kingdom, right? And
so she will become the longest reigning monarch of the United Kingdom.
Well, that was about the 10th of September that purportedly happened, but she'd already been struck off.
Yeah, so she didn't make it.
She didn't make it, but officially, the public gets the news that she is, right? In the week leading up to, I'm in a really small town. There's a lot of really small towns here, and this is a really small town. And the week leading up to Queen Elizabeth II supposedly being the longest reigning monarch, all these MI5 agents came to town, and there were 4 blacks and 3 whites. The whites were East European. They were all had been military fit, and they're all big guys. They're all about 18 stone, and they all had a cell phone, and they all had the same white earplug, and they were standing down the streets looking at me, right? And the black guys were on the phone all the time reporting, and the white guys were listening to music. And no one knew why they were there, right? And then this guy who had worked in the army, associated with the army doing explosions and stuff, he was the one who told me that they were all MI5. And he said, look, we can't think why they're here except for you. And
Are they essentially protecting you?
Well, they were here. It's weird because, a day and a half after Queen Elizabeth II purportedly became the longest reigning monarch, they just all disappeared. Just gone. Just gone. You know?
Well, it's as though she wanted to have that symbolic accomplishment and no interference from you. I mean, I wonder, Greg, this is just fascinating. We got less than 5 minutes, my friend.
Well, also on the legal papers, 8 days later, well, first of all, the symbolic date for the 17th of August is 1 and 7 is 8, August is an 8, 2015 is 2 plus 1, which is 5, which is an 8, so it's 888, right? And according to the Greek Orthodox Church and one other church, 888 means Jesus the Christ, right? Which is where they get the kingship from, right? Because they say they're from that lineage. So all of that means that this was a really important date. Now, it was further enacted, right, further sealed on the 25th of August 2015, whereby Queen Elizabeth II acknowledged that she had stepped down and that I was the Prince Pretender, right? And the 25th of August is 788, and the definition of 8 over 7, because you can put the month first, the definition of 8 over 7 is royal, as in 8 over 7 yards is a royal yard. Jim.
Yeah.
Stop typing. We've got 2
Yeah,
minutes.
it's about getting your show on the air, Greg. This is from my producer. Go ahead.
Okay,
yeah.
So that might be all we've got time for. But at the same time that this was happening, I was heavily attacked by army trolls. Right, one of who has just changed his name 3 times, and again, dangerous vehicle attack, tampered with, and another financial hit. So anyway, so have a look at www.theworldoftruth.net and have a look at The Hidden King of England, these books here, and you'll get
Greg, this all
background.
must be coming to a head imminently.
Well, they try to make it silent all the time. They try to play everything down. But so far, they've actually been totally playing into my hands all the way, such that I'm becoming a lawmaker. Like, of course, the change to the laws of succession, the change to criticising the British royal family. You're allowed to because they're illegitimate now. You can say whatever you want about them. And it's a matter of getting it heard by the media especially, but the media is controlled by the military, and the BBC is bullshit house, born the same year that the illegitimate Queen Elizabeth II was born as a commoner, promoted as a queen. So that's what's happened, 17th of August and the 25th of August. And
when do you expect the next major development?
The next major development will happen this year because the British courts and the Royal Court of Justice and all of the judges and all of the House of Lords do not have subject matter jurisdiction. That subject matter jurisdiction has to be found, possibly even with the former Queen Elizabeth II's assistants and agents, right? But what I'd quite like to do is, if we have another chance for an interview, I'd like to talk about the troll attacks that I've had in the meantime, because in about August 2014, when I received the books, Army Intelligence or Counterintelligence created their own team of army trolls to attack people on the internet. And that's happened to me, and it's very interesting. There's some very well-known people in the podcast broadcasting in England who turn out to be army trolls.
Well, Greg, this is all sensational stuff, and I'm hopeful that we can put it on the air tonight, but it depends on arriving at the studio in time. Yes, yes, yes. This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, thanking my special guest, Greg Hallett, for being here, the author of The Hidden King of England. You've heard the latest developments. This is absolutely sensational stuff. I can't thank you enough for being here, Greg, and everyone else. Thank you for listening. Greg, you need to help me compress